Have you ever found yourself just staring at maybe a seashell, that perfect spiral, or even a snowflake, and you get that feeling like there's some hidden order there?
Hmm.
Or maybe looked up at a galaxy, that huge swirl, and wondered, is there some kind of secret language? A blueprint underneath it all?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, today we're doing a deep dive into something that speaks right to that feeling. It's called sacred geometry.
A fascinating topic.
Our mission here is to really unpack this world. We'll look at its philosophical roots, where it pops up in nature, in ancient buildings, and how people see it today, including, where the claims line up with science and maybe where they don't.
It is compelling, isn't it? And sacred geometry, it's not just about pretty patterns.
Mhm.
The core idea is, well, that the universe isn't just random chaos.
Right.
It suggests a deliberate geometric plan. Certain shapes aren't just shapes. They're like universal archetypes, full of meaning. And the big question, the philosophical one framing all this is that meaning really out there in the cosmos? Or is it something we as humans project onto the world? A beautiful projection, maybe, but still ours.
That's a huge distinction to start with. So, okay, let's unpack this then. What is the foundational idea, the core postulate?
Right. At its heart, the main idea is that the universe is basically made of deliberate, ordered geometric design,
Not chaos.
not chaos.
Mhm.
And the belief is these patterns aren't just, coincidences. They repeat everywhere,
Mm.
from the tiniest subatomic level right up to the cosmic scale.
Wow.
And that repetition hints at something deeper, a spiritual structure underneath. So for people who study this, looking at, say, the flower of life or a spiral shell, it's not just, oh, that's nice.
No.
It's seeing connections between our world and this larger structured universe. And things like symmetry, balance, proportion, these aren't just aesthetic things. They're seen as the tools that create and maintain this harmony.
It definitely sounds like an ancient idea, this sense of cosmic order. Have thinkers, throughout history tackled this geometric universe idea?
Oh, absolutely. The whole concept of a divine geometer goes way back. You have Plato, the Greek philosopher, famously saying God geometrizes continually.
Right, I've heard that.
For him, geometry and numbers weren't just math homework. They were fundamental,
Yeah.
the actual building blocks of the world. That shaped a lot of Western thought.
Okay.
Then fast forward centuries, you get Johannes Kepler, the astronomer. With his Mysterium Cosmographicum, he was totally convinced the cosmos was built on God's geometric plan.
He tried to fit the planets into shapes, didn't he?
Exactly. The 5 Platonic solids. He thought their orbits nested perfectly within them. Now, he later figured out orbits were elliptical, but that initial impulse, wow. And even now, you hear echoes. The mathematician Xing Yao called geometry one of the main avenues for probing the universe.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a long-running thread.
So it's more than just belief. It's almost presented as a kind of universal language. Like the universe itself is speaking geometry.
That's exactly how it's often framed.
Yeah.
A visual language of creation, expressing how things like light, sound, vibration form how they all relate.
Okay.
And those core principles we mentioned, symmetry, balance, proportion, they're thought to create not just physical beauty, but spiritual alignment too. Order. It all points back to this idea that everything comes from one single unified source. And that interconnectedness that's summed up in that old Hermetic axiom, as above, so below.
Right.
The patterns you see in the small stuff, the microcosm, like a cell maybe,
Yeah.
they reflect the patterns in the big stuff, the macrocosm, like a galaxy.
So it's all mirrors.
In a way, yes. It's a fundamental lens for interpretation in sacred geometry.
Okay, if that's the grammar, then we need the alphabet, right, to really get it. What are the basic building blocks, the shapes and numbers?
Precisely. It hinges on this interplay between number and form. And numbers here aren't just for counting. They're seen as embodying certain principles, energies, meanings.
Archetypes.
Archetypes, exactly. So 1, that's represented by the circle, universally seen as unity, wholeness, pure potential, the foundation.
Makes sense.
2, that's a line, sure, but more importantly, it's the vesica piscis, those 2 overlapping circles.
Yeah, that eye shape.
Right. That symbolizes the balance of polarity, light, dark, masculine, feminine. It's expansion, the mirror of consciousness, the first step from pure unity into duality.
Okay, and 3.
3, that's the triangle, the archetype of balance, strength, stability, think, mind, and body, spirit, or past, present, future, trinities.
So these shapes, they're not static. You said they tell a story, like a geometric genesis.
Yeah.
Where does that story kick off?
It absolutely starts with the circle and the point. The circle, like we said, is oneness, infinity, pure consciousness, no beginning, no end. and ineffable oneness.
And the point.
The point at its center. That's the dimensionless source. The here and now where everything begins to expand from. Spiritually, it's that single point of unity where all diversity comes from. Like one breath creating all existence.
Okay, so that's the potential. How does it start to, well, do something? What's the first interaction, the first split?
That's the Vesica Piscis, the first act of differentiation. It's formed, like you said, by two equal circles intersecting, where the center of each one is right on the edge of the other.
Right.
Symbolically, it's seen as the womb of creation, the mother of all forms, the union of duality, spirit matter, masculine, feminine, giving birth to something new.
And you see that shape a lot historically.
Oh, everywhere. Neolithic art, Pythagorean mysticism, Christian art, the mandorla shape around Christ, or the ichthys fish symbol.
Wow.
And mathematically, it's fascinating. Its proportions naturally encode the square roots of 2, 3, and 5, which are fundamental, even leading to the golden ratio. So it's not just symbolism, it's mathematically loaded.
That's incredible. Did people think the ancients knew they were encoding that math? Or did they just find the shape worked and the meaning came later?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's debate. Many proponents of sacred geometry see the precision as proof of intentional ancient knowledge of universal laws.
Right.
Others, maybe more mainstream historians, suggest these ratios might have emerged from observation, trial and error in construction, and then the profound symbolic meaning was layered on top. Because humans do look for patterns.
Back to that core question, inherent or projected.
Exactly. Keeps coming back to that.
Okay, so from this initial union, the Vesica Piscis, the forms then, what multiply? Like a chain reaction.
Precisely. It's like an unfolding sequence, generating more complexity. From the Vesica Piscis, you can construct the seed of life, that's 7 overlapping circles, often linked to the 7 days of creation, fertility, the divine feminine.
Okay.
And as that pattern expands, you get the flower of life, the really famous one. Typically 19 complete overlapping circles in that hexagonal layout, all inside a bigger circle.
That's the one you see everywhere.
It really is. It's considered the blueprint of creation by many, said to contain all geometric forms. From it, you supposedly derive the tree of life, the fruit of life, even Metatron's cube. And yeah, you find it carved in the Temple of Osiris in Egypt, Assyrian palaces, Roman floors. It's globally present.
So if the flower of life is like the 2D master plan, what about the 3D building blocks? What represents actual physical reality?
Good question. That leads us directly to the Platonic solids. These are the 5, and only 5, perfectly regular polyhedra. All faces are the same regular polygon. All angles are the same.
The cube, the pyramid shape.
Exactly. The tetrahedron pyramid, the hexahedron cube, the octahedron, 2 pyramids base to base, the icosahedron, 20 triangular faces, and the dodecahedron, 12 pentagonal faces.
And Plato linked these to the elements.
He did in his Timaeus. Tetrahedron was fire, cube was earth, octahedron was air, icosahedron was water, and the dodecahedron. That was the cosmos itself, or ether. They're seen as this bridge between spirit and matter. Fundamental patterns. And interestingly, all 5 are said to fit perfectly inside Metatron's cube.
We keep mentioning Metatron's cube. We'll definitely need to circle back to that one.
We will.
But beyond these sort of static foundational shapes, there are also dynamic patterns, right? Things that imply growth, movement, maybe even time.
Absolutely. Then you get into things like the spiral, the Fibonacci sequence, and the golden ratio.
Okay, let's break those down.
The spiral. The spiral is huge. Symbolizes growth, evolution, expansion. You see it everywhere in nature, right?
Right.
DNA coils up in a spiral. Galaxies have spiral arms. It really drives home that as above, so below idea.
And Fibonacci, that's the number sequence.
The Fibonacci sequence, yeah.
Yeah.
Each number is the sum of the 2 before it. 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, and so on.
And that pops up in nature too.
Surprisingly often. The way leaves arrange on a stem, the number of petals on many flowers, the spirals in a sunflower head or a pine cone. They often follow Fibonacci numbers.
Wow. Okay, and the golden ratio.
The golden ratio, often called the divine proportion. It's roughly 1.618. It comes from dividing a line, so the ratio of the whole line to the longer part is the same as the ratio of the longer part to the shorter part.
And it's supposed to be aesthetically pleasing.
Widely considered to be, yes, harmonious. And here's the connection. If you take consecutive Fibonacci numbers, like 8 and 13 or 13 and 21, and divide the larger by the smaller, the ratio gets closer and closer to 5 the further you go.
Okay.
And that relationship generates the golden spiral, which is related to the spirals we see in nature, like the nautilus shell. The whole system, Fibonacci, phi, the spiral, is often seen as nature's secret code.
It's amazing that life seems to use these patterns. Is it intentional design, do you think, or is it just the most efficient way for things to grow, like physics?
And that hits the nail on the head again. That's the core debate. Sacred geometry proponents often see it as clear evidence of intelligent design, the universe choosing these elegant, harmonious forms.
Right.
The scientific perspective tends to see it more as an emergent property. Maybe the golden ratio offers the best way to pack seeds or distribute stress, so it arises naturally from physical laws and constraints. The pattern itself is undeniable. The why is where interpretations differ hugely.
And woven through all this is a constant, a number that both scientists and sacred geometers seem to respect, pi.
Yes, pi.
Oh.
The ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter, about 3.14159, and it goes on forever, never repeating. It's irrational, transcendental.
And in sacred geometry, that transcendental part is key.
It is. Its nature is seen as reflecting the idea that the circle's essence, unity, the divine, goes beyond simple linear understanding. It transcends rationality. And the fact that pi shows up in so many scientific formulas for cycles, waves, spheres, it reinforces its status as fundamental to the cosmos.
Like in Carl Sagan's Contact, searching for messages in pi.
Exactly. That captures the human yearning to find something profound hidden in these fundamental constants.
So it really feels like nature is presented as the ultimate classroom for sacred geometry. Where do we see these patterns most clearly in the living world?
Biology is definitely where you find some of the most cited and honestly most visually striking examples. That logarithmic spiral of the nautilus shell is iconic, right? It keeps its shape perfectly as it grows.
Yeah, beautiful.
Or the hexagons in a honeycomb. So precise, so efficient for space and strength. And then flowers, the arrangement of petals, the branching of trees, those spirals of seeds in a sunflower, they're constantly linked back to Fibonacci numbers and the golden ratio.
Okay.
These are held up as prime exhibits that life follows this geometric script.
And maybe the most startling claim, in modern times at least, involves DNA itself, the code of life.
Yes, that's a big one. The specific claim is that the DNA double helix, in one full cycle of its turn, measures 34 angstroms long and 21 angstroms wide.
And 21 and 34.
Are consecutive Fibonacci numbers. And their ratio, 34 divided by 21, is about 1.619, which is incredibly close to the golden ratio, phi.
Wow, that is close.
It is. And for many, this is presented as almost irrefutable proof that the very code of life is built on these sacred principles, connecting us biologically to this universal design.
Okay, let's zoom out now, way out, to the cosmos. Do these same patterns appear on that massive scale?
They do, or at least that's the interpretation. We mentioned Kepler trying to fit the planetary orbits into Platonic solids. He was searching for that divine geometric order in the heavens.
Even though he later found elliptical orbits.
Right, his own data corrected him, but it shows the power of the idea. And then on the grandest scale, spiral galaxies. Our own Milky Way, it's that same spiral form we see in the tiny shell or the DNA molecule.
As above, so below again.
Exactly. It's seen as the ultimate confirmation of that principle. A single geometric idea governing everything, tiny to vast.
So it's not just nature's design. Humans have intentionally used these principles too, right? Especially in architecture and sacred spaces, like building itself was a religious act.
That's a perfect way to put it, a theological act. Throughout history, different cultures have absolutely used geometry, sometimes consciously, sometimes perhaps more intuitively, to translate their understanding of cosmic order into physical form, adapting it to fit their own beliefs.
Can you give some examples? How did different traditions use it?
Sure. Let's take the ancient Egyptians. For them, geometry in huge structures like the Great Pyramid was about aligning with Ma'at, cosmic order, truth, balance, channeling divine energy. There are claims the pyramid encodes phi and pi.
But that's debated.
It is. Some Egyptologists think it might just be a byproduct of how they measured slopes using the Sikht. But temples like Karnak definitely show intense symmetry and astronomical alignments tied to their cosmology.
Okay. What about the Greeks?
Ancient Greeks were all about aesthetic perfection, harmony, kalikogathia, reflecting a rational cosmos. The Parthenon, for instance, uses incredibly sophisticated proportions, like a consistent 4.9 ratio. But the popular idea uses the golden ratio. That's actually a myth.
Really? I thought that was accepted.
Nope. Detailed studies show 4.9 in optical refinements, no phi. But they did arrange whole temple sites across landscapes in precise geometric ways, like forming perfect isosceles triangles. So harmony was key, just maybe not always phi.
Fascinating. And Gothic cathedrals, they feel very geometric.
Oh, profoundly. For Gothic Christians, geometry was the tool to manifest divine light lux divina, to lift the soul. They used regulating lines, the pointed arch, ribbed vaults, all geometric innovations. Key forms were the Latin cross floor plan, the rose window, the circle of unity, and the triangle for the Trinity. Geometry literally made those huge stained glass windows possible, flooding the space with light.
Like Chartres.
Chartres is a prime example. This labyrinth alone is packed with geometry 11 circuits, a hidden 13-point star, maybe even astronomical alignments.
Amazing. How about Islamic traditions? They have incredible geometric patterns.
Yes. Islamic art and architecture is famous for it. Because of the aniconic tradition not depicting figures, geometry became the primary way to express the infinite, unified nature of God, Tawhid.
Through patterns.
Through complex tessellations. Star patterns 8, 10, 12 points are common. Circle-based construction is fundamental. Things like Giri tile work are so complex, mathematicians recently found they relate to modern quasicrystals. And there's often this idea of veiling a complex surface pattern, hiding the simpler geometric grid underneath, symbolizing hidden divine order.
And Eastern traditions. Hindu, Buddhist.
Hindu and Buddhist traditions use geometry to create microcosms of the universe. Maps for consciousness. Think of mandalas like the Vastu Purusha mandala used for temple layouts. Or yantras, like the Sri Yantra with its 9 interlocking triangles symbolizing Shiva and Shakti union, creating 43 smaller triangles mapping the cosmos. And fractal geometry. You see it in the temple towers, shikaras, or vimanas like at Kandarya Mahadev Temple. The main tower shape repeats itself in smaller and smaller versions all the way up. It's a visual teaching of their cosmology.
Okay, let's jump way forward now to today. It seems like sacred geometry has had this huge revival, but maybe shifted focus, less about huge temples, more personal.
That's a really insightful way to put it. Yes, the focus has largely shifted from these grand communal religious statements to tools for personal development, healing, wellness, especially in New Age and spiritual circles. It's about how these patterns resonate within the individual.
And there's one symbol that seems to embody a lot of this modern synthesis, right? Metatron's cube.
Yes, Metatron's cube is central to the modern movement. It does have older roots in Jewish mysticism linked to the archangel Metatron. But its current form comes from the fruit of life pattern, those 13 circles within the flower of life.
How is it made?
You draw straight lines connecting the center of each of those 13 circles to the center of every other circle. And its big significance is that it visually contains projections of all 5 Platonic solids within its lines.
Ah, so it holds all the building blocks?
That's the idea, a comprehensive blueprint.
Yeah.
It's also often interpreted as balancing masculine and feminine energies. It's become a very popular and potent symbol today.
So how are people actually using these symbols like Metatron's cube or the flower of life for healing or wellness now?
It gets applied in quite a few ways, often as a therapeutic tool, believed to help harmonize the body's energy or frequencies. So for meditation, people might use these forms, mandalas, flower of life, the cube, as visual focus points like yantras, to quiet the mind, reduce stress, feel connected.
Okay.
Then you have crystal grids. People arrange crystals in specific geometric patterns on these symbols, believing it amplifies the crystal's properties and focuses their intention for healing or manifestation.
Interesting.
In energy healing modalities, like Reiki perhaps, practitioners might visualize these shapes over the body's energy centers, the chakras, or draw symbols in the air to channel or enhance energy flow.
Right.
And even in practices like Feng Shui, you might see recommendations to place objects of certain shapes in specific areas of the home to attract desired energies, like a square object for relationship stability, or a triangle for fame and recognition.
And beyond the wellness sphere, does it influence mainstream design, the things we see every day?
Oh, definitely. Its aesthetic appeal and symbolic weight still inspire designers. In art and interior design, you had artists like Dali using the golden ratio. Today, designers might use geometric layouts to influence the mood of a room, create flow, or even design spaces as sort of visual mandalas. In architecture, the golden ratio is still sometimes consciously used, even with the historical debates. Think of the UN headquarters building, often cited. It's about achieving visual harmony and pleasing proportions. It also pops up a lot in commercial and digital design. Graphic design, websites, logos, principles of symmetry, balance, maybe even the golden ratio grid are used to make things look appealing, balanced, professional.
In jewelry, tattoos?
Everywhere. Personal adornment is huge. Flower of life pendants, Metatron's cube necklaces, seed of life earrings, tattoos. People wear them as talismans for protection or connection, or just as expressions of their identity and beliefs. It's really permeated popular culture.
Okay, this is all incredibly rich. The history, the modern uses, it's clearly powerful for many people. But we have to ask about the critical perspective, right? The science, the philosophy. Where do these claims, especially the more, let's say, metaphysical ones, stand up to scrutiny?
Absolutely crucial question. And this is where we need careful analysis. A lot of claims, especially those about energy or consciousness, risk committing what philosophers call a category error, meaning conflating things that belong in different categories, like seeing a beautiful pattern, aesthetics, or noticing a correlation observation and jumping straight to claiming it causes something or has inherent energetic properties without solid proof.
Okay.
So, yes, geometric patterns exist in nature. Science fully acknowledges that. But the claims about cosmic consciousness linked to these shapes,
Yeah.
or vibrational frequencies they emit, or specific healing energies, these lack empirical evidence. They're generally not testable or falsifiable in a scientific way.
So they fall into belief, not science.
Exactly. They belong more to the realm of belief, spirituality, or symbolic interpretation, which is valid in its own right, but it's not the same as scientific validation. And there's that key distinction between formal mathematics and symbolic interpretation. Math is about proofs, logic, quantifiable relationships. Critics sometimes point out that a pattern like the flower of life from a purely mathematical standpoint might be considered quite simple or boring. Well, their point is, its perceived importance comes from the meaning humans give it, the symbolism we layer on, not necessarily from unique mathematical depth. And this reflects that old philosophical split. Is math discovered, like Plato or Kepler thought, which aligns with sacred geometry's view, or is it invented by humans to describe things, closer to Einstein's view? Science uses geometry constantly, but doesn't need it to be inherently divine. And it's really important to deconstruct some widely held myths.
Okay, like the Parthenon. You mentioned that earlier.
Exactly, the Parthenon, masterpiece. Yes. Yeah. Harmonious? Absolutely. Built using the golden ratio? No. That's a persistent modern myth. Architectural historians have shown clearly its beauty comes from that 4.9 ratio and incredibly subtle optical adjustments. There's zero evidence the ancient Greeks intentionally used phi there. It seems to be a case of retroactive projection, finding a pattern later and assuming it was intended.
Wow, okay. What about the human body?
Similar story. Claims that human body proportions perfectly match the golden ratio are heavily disputed by scientific studies. Yes, you can find approximations if you measure enough things, but critics say that's likely statistical chance, maybe some cherry-picking of measurements that fit, rather than a consistent fundamental design principle.
So finding 1.6 something isn't proof?
Not in itself, no. Not when you have so many potential ratios to choose from in a complex system like the body.
And the DNA molecule. That 3:4:21 ratio is very close.
It is remarkably close. But again, scientifically speaking, that correlation doesn't automatically equal divine causation. It could be a coincidence. Or, more likely from a biological perspective, it might represent the most energetically efficient way for the molecule to pack itself.
So efficiency, not necessarily design.
From a purely scientific view, yes. The leap from it's efficient and approximates phi to it's proof of God's geometric plan is a metaphysical interpretation, not a scientific conclusion. And we should probably mention the source of much of the modern popular movement, particularly things like the flower of life and the Merkaba meditation. A lot traces back to Drinvalo Melchizedek.
Okay. What's the critical take there?
Critics often point out that his system relies heavily on personal revelations, information he says he received from angels or from Thoth, the Egyptian deity. These aren't verifiable claims. His writings have also faced criticism for containing mathematical errors or inconsistencies. So skeptics tend to see him as popularizing a system that might be spiritually meaningful to many, but isn't rigorously sacred or geometry in a formal historical or mathematical sense. And just as an extreme example of where taking these ideas very literally can lead, you have Terence Howard's teriology.
The actor.
Yes. He's developed theories claiming, for instance, that 1 × 1 = 2, that straight lines aren't real, and that the flower of life holds the key to a new math that overturns physics. Okay. Now, this is widely dismissed by the scientific community as lacking evidence and consistency, but it illustrates how deep literal belief in the symbolism, detached from mainstream science, can lead to very unconventional conclusions.
Right. So after all this, the history, the beauty, the modern uses, the critiques, what does it all mean? For us, for you listening, what's the enduring power here, even with the debates?
I think sacred geometry has this really profound dual legacy. On one side, it's this incredibly rich archive of history, culture, art. It inspired some of humanity's most breathtaking creations. It clearly speaks to a deep, maybe universal human need to find order, meaning connection in the universe.
A way to make sense of it all.
Exactly. And it often acts as this bridge, trying to connect our intuition, our spiritual feelings, with something rational, logical geometry. It gives a framework to those feelings, tries to align heart and mind with some perceived cosmic source.
What the other side is.
The other side is that its modern form, especially in the wellness space, often crosses into pseudoscience with claims that just aren't backed by empirical evidence.
So it really lives on a spectrum, doesn't it? At one end, you've got verifiable history, stunning art, fascinating math patterns we can actually observe and study.
Mhm.
And at the other end, you have a modern spiritual movement. Deeply meaningful for many people, absolutely, but making claims that science doesn't or maybe can't substantiate.
That sums it up well.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe at the end of the day, sacred geometry is best understood as a powerful, symbolic system, like a mirror. It reflects back what we're looking for. Whether you see those patterns as messages from a divine geometer, or as the natural outcome of physical laws optimizing for efficiency, or even as projections of our own minds craving order. Studying it offers this unique lens. It makes you look closer at the world, appreciate form and number. And it definitely reminds us of that timeless human quest, doesn't it? To figure out our place in this vast, intricate, maybe even geometric tapestry of the cosmos.